Hello and welcome to the How2Exit Podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How2Exit Podcast. Today I'm here with Ray Drew. He is one of the top SBA lenders, and we're going to hang out today and talk everything about getting SBA loans, about small business acquisitions, and hopefully have some really cool stories from you, Ray. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, we always start with kind of the origin story. It's been a long time, probably a couple of years since you've been on here. We were talking beforehand. I don't think you've been on here since we moved to California, which is at least 2.5 years. So tell us kind of, who you are and how you got into the SBA lending, and then we'll get into the details of stuff.
I cannot believe that, Ron. I mean, I had a baby, my first kid, between now and then. So I'm a completely different person, but I'm still
It changes you.
Yeah, got a daughter now. She's already 1.5, a little bit more than that, actually. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm an SBA lender since I was 22. I'm 35 now. So my whole career has been all about small business financing. And I just fell into it like many people in my industry did. And I fell in love with it because you're able to, I go out and develop my own business. So I have that sense of entrepreneurship within me to come do things like this, to come, spread the message and try to help folks get through the SBA loan process, typically to buy a business. But I also get to play a part in that role, which is just phenomenal. So I was just looking at the numbers just since 2021, because remember 2020, there was like this, I almost call it like a renaissance of acquisition for the small business space, because previous to that, and by the way, Walker Deibel's book, Buy Then Build, came out around 2018. So sure, that certainly created an army of buyers. But before that, we just called it, guy buying a business or gal buying a business. And then, now you have self-funded search and you have all these things. And with the podcast game and the social media game and that book and the communities and the gurus and the influencers and all like that, there is just more buyers than ever before. And all of a sudden my phone's blowing up left and right, 2021, 2022, 2023. So since 2021, I was just looking, I've done $165 million worth of SBA 7A loans, just myself and my team, of course, but that's ones I've originated, which is more than I did the previous 10 years before that. But that's all I've been doing pretty much ever since college.
Oh, wow. So I knew it picked up. I came in right as COVID was hitting. I had sold or basically shut down and sold my real estate investment firm to my business partner. So we just split up the real estate. It wasn't a big exit or anything. And then I was looking for something else to do. I started getting into this space, and it was kind of one of those obscure things. I found 2 or 3 people that were teaching it, and I found Walker's book. I found the Harvard Review book. I read a couple of books. I got myself about a little bitty thing. I bought a pest control business, and I say I bought it. I started to buy a pest control business, and we pretty much just bought their equipment because they weren't up for regulations and stuff. And then the next thing I know, I realized how wrong I went. So I started getting those gurus and finding them. And since then, now there's just a lot more people teaching it. A lot of people have been teaching it for a long time. They were just, kind of, I guess they laid back for a while. And because a lot of the people you see now, they've been doing it for a long time, but they're back to teaching it.
A lot. And by the way, there's some good and some bad, and you've got to be watch out for that. I've worked with a lot of the folks at Acquisition Lab, which is Walker's accelerator or whatever. And I've got some friends that do a boot camp over in the Tampa market. You probably are connected with them as well. But then I also see folks who are pitching that You don't need money, you don't need experience, you don't need nothing, just go buy a business. And I field those calls and I have to tell them like, no, that's not exactly the case. Like if you're trying to buy a business, you do need to put some skin in the game. I would say 99% of the time. There are some exceptions, but certainly by and large, banks want you to have skin in the game. It's just like a foundation of lending, period. And you've got to have the right type of experience. I mean, it's critical. I mean, you're coming into these living, breathing things. It's incredible how much stress the small business owners deal with, especially when you're taking like these businesses that, a founder has grown from nothing to this big profitable business, and we're placing 90% leverage on top of it in many cases, and even if it's with a seller note and SBA, but you're typically 90% leverage. All of a sudden, you buy the business. Yeah, what was on paper is one thing, but like you have that stress of that payment now. That's a lot to carry on yourself. And so if you're buying a business, you don't need to know exactly how to operate that specific business. That's very rare that you would come in and know the industry inside and out like the seller, but you certainly need to have some managerial experience or some relevant experience or some financial literacy, experience managing a P&L or a budget specifically would be ideal. So I do like to take a second, when I come on these things to dispel some of those sort of like myths, I guess you can say that some of the folks are putting out there.
And I've worked with some of those guys, and what they're not telling you is it's not no money down, and it's not even, to some extent, it's not even none of your own money down because you still have to pay for certain things, but it really limits what they can look at because the only option if you don't have money down is you can't go the SBA route. You actually end up going, they have to be really heavily asset based. They have to have real estate. They have to have a huge you can do asset-backed loans. There's all these other ways to raise that capital, including outside investors. But you're going from something that's pretty difficult anyway, right? To find a good qualified business to do that, to looking at 100, 200 businesses and finding a really good one that's loanable, to looking at thousands of businesses to find one you can do without a loan.
So I feel like it's we're creating separate spaces here. Like you have and everything we're talking, like, people know middle market, like
Mhm.
we're kind of main street and then maybe lower middle or lower middle market. I don't know exactly what we're calling it, but it's that 1 to 10 million. It's really under 10 million, let's say, is kind of this market down
Mhm.
here. And really the majority of what I do is 1 to 6 million because there's only a good handful of lenders doing what we call pari passu lending, where you can, put the conventional on top of the SBA to get to a 7, 8, $9 million type of deal. But I'm not doing that. So I'm really more in the $1 to $6 million range. But even within this like size, just a deal enterprise value size, it's almost like what you kind of were alluding to is almost, I would call like an alternative acquisition routes, because the conventional acquisitions in this space, it's all SBA. I mean, that's really the only game in town, but you've got to have certain type of buyers and certain type of sellers, mainly sellers reporting profits on tax returns and stuff like that. Those are all getting done
Mhm.
SBA by and large. And then you have those more alternative where you get a little more creative, get a little more crafty, but you're kind of like looking, I don't know. I feel like it's sometimes a needle in the haystack.
Oh, it definitely is. Because I wanted to dispel, like, could it be really done? I hunted, and I found I've interviewed 3 or 4 that did a true no money. And I've interviewed one guy that got $800,000 at close, right? He got paid to buy the company. It's like it's a unicorn hunting though. In that instance, the owner wanted to sell the real estate and the company, and he found a sell leaseback option to fund the entire deal at more than the business was worth. So he got to take $800,000 worth of capital and put it into future acquisitions and operating expenses. Good luck finding those, right?
Yeah,
You could spend 10 years and not find another one that fits that criteria.
I think I
So,
saw that episode. I
uh,
think, did you have a sale leaseback person on here before?
yeah, I had both of that and the person who's completed the deal
Oh,
because
wow.
I wanted to interview somebody that's done one, right? He had bought a cabinetry shop with the real estate attached.
I did. I actually did a woodworking type of deal that was similar to that situation, because it was almost like you left the closing table like just no, if you told somebody the deal you got as a buyer, like no, like it's hard to believe almost. But in this particular case, the buyer had a business already. And that's a huge unlock too. Like getting the first deal done, or even if you start a business and are able to grow it to a certain point, like the amount of leverage that creates, not just financially, but just in like opening the door to sellers and things like that. So this particular guy, he was I haven't told this story on a podcast. It's not like crazy, but it's an amazing American story because the guy's in his mid 30s or lower 30s. And he's running a huge business now. And he started it as a side hustle. He was a CPA, and it was an online business selling woodworking equipment, very niche stuff. And he grew it to 4 million, and he did have some debt on it because you have the inventory component to these businesses, which is like the hardest part, in my opinion. So he had about $750,000 in inventory debt, and he was paying 11%, which, by the way, at the time was cheap. Or I'm sorry,
Right.
expensive. Very expensive. Today, that's kind of where the SBA rates are. But we're like, we got to fix that debt. But at the same time, he wanted to acquire a similar business. One of his competitors essentially was trying to sell the business, and they were a $4 million revenue business. So we structured a deal where he was buying it for about 3 million. So he essentially put in $150,000, which is about 5%, and he walked away from the closing with doubled his business, went from 4 million to 8 million overnight. We refinanced the debt, which took his monthly payment down from like 30,000 a month to like 10,000 a month, something like that. Like just huge debt relief. And then we gave him $400,000 for working capital and inventory. So where's the down? That's like such a crazy unlock. And it was totally, prudent lending because you got cash flow all around. You got a buyer with industry experience. Like it just made sense.
I think you could overcome the money aspect with the right series of companies, something that's very asset heavy, faster than you can the experience, right? Uh, I would say not having managerial experience, and not because I see people all the time that come onto my meetups and stuff and like, I'm going to buy a business. It's cool. What have you done before? Well, I've been an employee on a W-2 for the last 15 years. Awesome. Have you ever had P&L experience whatsoever? You ever been responsible for profit and loss or managing large groups of people? No, but I'm ready to take that on. And I'm thinking, you better get really creative and find somebody that's going to work with you for a while, because I don't think you're going to be SBA lendable. They look at some of that. They're going to SBA acts a little bit like a standard investor would. Can I back this horse? Right, right. Can I bet on this horse? There's a little bit of vetting you that goes on, and he didn't get that. He didn't. One or more than one person said, "Well, it's just a loan. They're going to loan to me if the business is right." I was like, "No, you're a component of that business, right? You're the operator."
I've been seeing that for so many years. Like, why do you have to look at my personal credit? First of all, red flag right out of the gate. But it's the business. Well, who's making payroll? Is it the business? Who's writing the loan payment check every month? Is it the business? No, it's a human. It's you. And of course, we're going to look at your credit history and your experience. If I put a 12-year-old in there, it's not the business, right? No, it's a 12-year-old running the business. That's not going to work. So I had one just like that guy come to me, because I try to make myself as available as possible. And he's like, I'm going to buy a company in this industry. And it's an industry where you kind of do want experience. There's a few handful of industries where it's like you kind of want experience there. And he's like, I don't have that experience. What do you recommend? And my answer in that case was go get that experience. Like, why are you buying that particular business when you know nothing about it? And that is sometimes, fine if you have a really strong management background, but you got to think to yourself, like, what am I bringing to the table? I mean, if you have to go get a partner for the money and you have to get a partner who knows how to run it, why are you involved? It's got to make sense for the buyer as well.
You can be really good at business and financials and numbers, and then find somebody who's good at the general operator. Like, I don't think you have to be a great painter to own a painting company, but you better be something to that business that's critical. A great sales guy, you probably understand, colors and how things mix, match, and what happens, and some of the logistics of the business too. Because as any business, I always call it the BS meter, right? You better learn enough knowledge and know when something's off or wrong, right? You go back to painting. I grew up a painter's son, so I have a little bit of insight. I've probably painted more houses than most, right? Hundreds and hundreds of houses. You can't do that when it's over a certain temperature outside or under a certain temperature outside. And you can't, certain paints can't go on top of each other. Latex on top of oil-based paints is a really bad idea. They don't seal and attach. But if you don't have any industry experience, you're like, I'm great at running business, I'm great at sales, I can do stuff, you're going to have a lot of hiccups along the way because you're going to have some very expensive repairs to make when you apply things wrong or do things wrong. And there's a lot of industries like that.
I mean, restaurants is one where I will not finance a restaurant to someone that doesn't have restaurant experience. I would say by and large, just to drive this point home for the audience, like if you're buying a business in a particular industry, 90% of the time my buyers don't have experience in that industry. Now there is some risk to that. You're going to be heavily reliant on the seller post close to train you, which is why it's important to do these things like a seller note. You also look at the management that's in place in the business, and then you look at your own experience. And really managing people is like a big component that's going to translate over to any business, and certainly the P&L and L and the budget, which we have hammered home now. But you also have to be able to see yourself in that business every day. I mean, people tend to be looking at the numbers and buying the cash flow. But if the seller is doing, whatever the seller is doing on a day to day, that's going to be your role, especially in the beginning. Maybe you can grow out of it over time, but you're still I mean, I've heard on other podcasts. I remember one specifically where it was so wacky. The buyer was coming in, and the seller was coming in at like 5 a.m. or something like that every day. And I guess they didn't know that until after close, but he had to wake up at the crack of dawn before really to get there to do this like archaic starting of the facilities for this like sort of really manufacturing heavy type of business, really sweaty business. And he was doing all this stuff every single morning for an hour and a half just to get the machines up and running. You probably he didn't think of that when he was doing the deal, that that's actually what his life was going to be. And you do have to kind of take a second to think about what that's going to look like on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think you're going to buy a bakery and not get up at 2 in the morning to start making dough so it can proof by the time people are up and ready for breakfast, you're insane. I know a few people that own those, and most of them start at 2 or 3 in the morning. So that's the whole point, right? So
Yeah.
and there's other industries that in this that are the same. So absolutely, and restaurants are. I would say if you've never operated a business and you're just trying to figure out what you're going to do, find one that has a decent profit margin and room for error. There are things like restaurants and stuff that typically operate at 3, 4, 5% profit margin, unless it's a very specialized like beer and pizza, or there's a few outliers inside of the restaurant industry that are high profit margin, but they're not very many, right? Basically, it's sandwiches and pizza and alcoholic beverages. They do good profit margins, and everything else is lean. Like your staff and everything else will eat you alive.
Most of the
There's a lot of industries like that.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you there.
No, that's cool. I said there's a lot of industries like that though.
I was going to say most of the people that come to me that want to buy restaurants are outside the industry, because the ones that are in the restaurant industry say, I do not. Why would I want to buy a restaurant? But I don't mind restaurants. Franchise restaurants also offer a little bit of extra support. I've done. I did a franchise. This was a small deal, but a small, fast casual. A couple of bankers one time, like 3 bankers, and they were all
Mhm.
making a ton of money. So I was like, yeah, this is no problem. I'll do it. And one of the guys was going to quit his job and run it or something like that. And I was okay with it because it was a franchise. And at the end of the day, you didn't have direct industry experience in restaurants, but that's not what franchises are about. Now that deal ended up not going that well. That was pre-COVID, and they were in an office building at the bottom of an office building. So that kind of hurt, but they repaid the loan. They didn't default on it, but like you're still not happy when you're having to pay this loan back and your business isn't profitable. But one thing that's really I get a lot. I get it every day. I've gotten it 1,000 times. It's, what does the SBA think about this? So we're touching on it right now. I'm giving you my opinion. I work for Trueliant. We're a division of a credit union. We have a nationwide SBA program, and we're a preferred lender. So we are making our own decisions. We simply have an insurance policy if a deal goes bad. And that is what the SBA 7A is. It's an insurance policy. It has nothing to do with you. It's mostly to do with us, helps mitigate our risk so that we can make these loans, which wouldn't be approved conventionally, and offer terms that you wouldn't be able to get in the conventional world. Longer amortizations, longer terms, lower equity requirements. So when I'm saying something, it's not like it's the SBA. There's some stuff that's like that, but half of it is just bank by bank discretion. So, when somebody comes to me and asks me a question, you can ask probably 9 other bankers and maybe get different answers. And that's a point I want to drive home as well, because I had one person reach out to me, what was it, 2 days ago, and they said right off the bat, it was a couple. They seemed very intelligent. They were buying a business that was I'll just say I think I can say this. It's residential cleaning. It's a business that's very physical. You're in the field, and they were not local to the business. They had a plan to go there. They had family there, so I understand they were buying a business where they have some roots, but they had no intention of moving there. So they were going to run it remotely, and it was probably it was a 2-hour plane ride, and you couldn't drive there. So and they were reliant on a GM was in place for 16 years. Okay. So I understood it. And SBA, by and large, they don't love that, like SBA lenders, but they said they had 2 lenders that said they think they can get comfortable with it. I was not. Here's why. First of all, they had a 16-year GM in place making $48,000. That seemed like they were being underpaid. Why were they there for 16 years? And I asked the question, why are they not buying the business? And they didn't know if they were approached. Fine. Not everyone wants to own a business, totally understandable. But I would have concern if they weren't approached after 16 years of helping build the business for the owner, just simply because you're now taking over the business, and a key part of your plan is to rely on a GM who's the boots on the ground. And the day after closing, they are finding out about the closing, and they may not be happy about that. And then all of a sudden, if they leave and you're 2 hours away, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't comfortable with it. But the point is, a couple other lenders supposedly were, and that's fine. Everyone's going to have their own decision-making promise or processes.
Yeah, there's something to be said by that too, because not all SBA lenders are equal, and some of them have preferential markets they deal with. Like there are certain SBA lenders that just don't touch anything that's e-com, right? One of the things I always tell everybody is like, look, when you meet with an SBA lender, ask them if they have any industries they prefer, like if your industry's outside of that comfort zone. And if they tell you no, say, okay, what's the last 10 loans you closed on? Because a lot of times you'll figure out, especially the small credit unions, you'll figure out they closed on, for instance, I talked to one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I moved here from. And like, oh no, we don't have any preference. And all they've ever closed on was what's around them, industrial and medical. They've never seen e-com. They've never, like, there was a lot of industries they've just never touched, and they wouldn't know how to evaluate. They're going to have to say no to those. It's outside of their comfort zone. Now, it's a small credit union. Had I been doing business with them for 15 years and had my other businesses with them, I probably could have got them to do it, right? Because it has to go in front of the board. But if you don't have relationships with some of these small businesses, finding out what's inside of these credit unions, finding out what's inside of their comfort zone is critical too. You're working something that's got a national program, so I doubt you have a honed in. So going back to the operator needing skills and stuff like that, have you had any cases where you just the operator didn't have the skills, but you just kind of some other aspect of them had you guys push it through and get the loan done?
100%. Yeah. I'm thinking of a transaction I financed at my last shop where this was another young guy, by the way. I think I've got a soft spot for young entrepreneurs, but this deal, I can't believe this deal closed, and he's doing so well. It's crazy. It wasn't going well at first, but he is now doing very well, as of the last couple of months, and he just turned it around. But ultimately, what happened was he had more of a finance background, we'll say, but like a genius, like these guys. he actually saved up. He had $500,000 saved up, and he bought a business, which is good for a 25-year-old. I think he was writing. This was during when the markets were really just. This was like 20, before the markets turned with inflation and rates and stuff like that. But he bought a business in the construction industry for 3.7, I think it was. I can't. I'm a little fuzzy, but anyway, he obviously did not have construction experience, and his management experience was pretty light. I mean, we were really, just to give you an idea, he had a landscaping business in high school. A couple guys, we were kind of talking about that as like his most relevant experience. So just to give you an idea, now he's buying this huge $8 million revenue business. So it was a little bit of a leap. I passed on it. But these deal guys, they just won't take no for an answer. So he came back, and we basically said, all right, if you got a seller, you got a GM, and you got an operations manager. If we can get the GM and the operation managers to buy into your plans and get some equity, then that should shore up the experience, because they were running the business anyway. And the equity would help incentivize them to keep going. So even with that, though, it's like a 50-50 situation. That we also got the seller to hold a pretty large note. They held like 700,000. So I remember that conversation. We got it to my chief credit officer's desk. My chief credit officer's looking at it, and she's just like, let me talk to this guy, which doesn't always happen, right? This is the decision maker behind the curtain talking to the borrower. Most of those credit people don't like having those conversations. Mine did, which I had a tremendous amount of respect for her for doing this type of stuff on the borderline deals. And sure enough, she felt what I was feeling. This guy knows his stuff, super sharp. She hung up and said, I love him. I was like, okay, that's awesome. So after closing, though, this is the problem with partnerships, getting into partnerships with people you don't know. Didn't work out with one of those people. And that was the person doing the bidding, the estimating. This was a company that did residential construction. Not like GC work, but like siding and stuff like that. And that hurt, because then you have to replace that person. Also, part of the reason it didn't work out was just with the margins of the when you're bidding. Obviously, you're trying to back in a certain gross profit margins, and he was undercutting a little bit, and it just didn't work out. And so there were a couple rough months there, but we did a deferment, which gave him a little bit of breathing room, and he was able to turn it around. And now he called me. In fact, I have a text right here from him, and he's trying to buy another business in the next 6 months, and he wants a big exit. So this is a very ambitious person. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
It's awesome. And, I think there's a few guys out there that we were talking about gurus earlier stuff. There's one of them. He's very crude. I won't follow his name up here because I don't have his permission. But one of the famous things he's known for saying is, like, if you don't get a business deal funded, you just gave up too soon, because there's always somebody out there that's got more money than they got sense. And if you got at least a halfway decent idea, somebody's going to fund it. So the guy that doesn't give up and goes from one bank to the other bank, it happens. I talked to at least a dozen acquisition entrepreneurs, and when I find out, like, the ones that had the rough time, I've seen some go through 6 or 7 loan processes before they find somebody would help them get it done. But so long as he went through, I think he said 6 or 7 loan processes and 2 deals, because the first seller just got burned out on the process. If you've got the wherewithal to stick to it, you'll find a way to get it done. Tenacity is extremely powerful skill set there, or you call it trait to have in this space. But the other elements have to be there to some extent. Don't get me wrong. This guy had some of those other elements, but he was just missing enough that, like, your average SBA lender is going to tell him no, right? The other thing I'll tell you is, it's easier to fix not knowing enough about a business, or but you got other skills like the finance guy, than it is to fit extreme cultural mismatches. I had a gentleman, on my hangout. We do a hangout twice a month for people who are buying and selling companies. This guy is pure Ivy. He's still wearing a cardigan, Harvard grad, and he tells me, I'm going to buy construction of businesses. I was like, you are? construction business, like what kind of construction? Building houses, residential development. I was like, you don't stand an effing chance. What did you say to me? He got all offended. And he's like, you don't talk to me that way. I said, see, you don't stand a chance, because that is going to be a very common way that people talk to you in that industry. I grew up in that industry, and you don't have the thickness for it, right? They're going to eat you alive. It's like I've been on job sites for that type of stuff. I grew up in an environment. I said, how often are you going to be able to break up two adults from fighting? Because in construction sites, these guys are a little bit redneck. They're a little bit backwoods in most states. And occasionally, you can't fire all your best, construction workers. And occasionally, one of them's going to throw a hammer at the other guy. It just happens on these job sites. And he just didn't believe me that in this day and time, that type of stuff happens. I was like, they're going to eat you alive. I've already interviewed enough people who. Another Harvard grad interviewed. He wouldn't let me put it on after the interview because he realized where he was headed. But later on, he sold it.
Wow.
He showed up a 3-piece suit and tie after buying a moving company.
Why would you? I agree with you,
Yeah.
by the way, on the construction thing. Like, that's one of the industries where you've got to at least be adjacent to, if not in the industry. And it's funny you actually mentioned that, because I have a great example of all of this, which is this business I financed. I think that was about a year and a half ago now. No. I don't remember. It's all it's all blur ever since
They
having
all
the
blurred
daughter.
together.
I don't even know what year it is, but no. And by the way, I did the best YouTube video I ever made about this story. Which, if you go to SBA Ray on YouTube and you type in the Carpers, this is that story. And this was one where it was a young couple. By the way, they had their first kid during the loan process, and it's a construction business acquisition where they were actually doing big home remodels and builds for property owners, because you can't do spec house deals with SBA funds, so that's not a eligible business. Side note, but so this was just a typical high-end residential contractor type of business acquisition. And the person who had the in-depth construction knowledge, probably actually the most knowledgeable construction person I know, was the wife, and the husband was more of the deal guy. And so I, at one point, because we had a couple hurdles, I said, I don't remember if I said, like, why are you still fighting for this deal? Or do you think this is a sign that, this is not the one? And because, it was just one of those things where it was like, I always say a deal is going to die at least once before it closes. But, this was like a three killer type of deal. And we ended up closing it, but he would not give up. But I just think it's amazing that his wife is like just a genius when it comes to construction. But being a female in that particular field out on the job sites is definitely, we didn't really get into it that much because I didn't want to make the episode about that, but I have to imagine that's got to be very difficult.
So anybody's listening to this, if you're new to the space, you haven't heard one of the other shows, what is the process? Because people mess it up all the time. They go negotiate a deal and they bring it to you, and you have to give them the sad news that, oh, congratulations, you negotiated something we can't close on, right?
We got to give Bruce Marks credit to that one.
Yeah, it's definitely his statement. Yeah, he's the one that probably, he said that, and I was like, yeah, that is definitely something I picked up there. Yeah. But I've read so many books, listened to so many podcasts, and I don't know if I have original thought anymore. It all came from somewhere else. So everything I say, we'll figure out where the origin comes from. If you really want to know, we'll figure out who said it.
But no, we can get into the process. The process is, that's the number one question I answer every single day. Let's really break it down here, because I want to give your audience a clear understanding of the process. Let me start with this. The loan process for an acquisition doesn't dictate the timing. There's so many things running in parallel. There's the loan, there's the APA agreements being negotiated, or stock purchase agreements. That is following your due diligence period. We have business valuations going in the background. If there's real estate collateral, we're doing due diligence on the real estate. We're getting title policies. You're getting life insurance. We're underwriting the loan. So all of this is happening in unison. what you need in a lender is someone who can be clear, follow through, be responsive. And typically, I think a business acquisition takes 60 to 90 days. I usually say, let's shoot for, if you're going under LOI, ask for 90. That's pretty reasonable. Let's shoot for 60. We can definitely roll out a 60-day process, and I can tell you exactly what the benchmarks will be, but something's going to come up somewhere, and you just want to have a little wiggle room to be able to say, hey, this is a problem. We did not know about this. Give me a week. Let's deal with it, whether it's the landlord issue or just a negotiation point with the seller that holds things up. But something's going to happen. And so that said, I want you to think of the process in three parts. The first part is pre-approval. This is where you're talking and having those initial conversations with the lender, and they're just trying to understand, is this something we can do? Is this something I can get approved and closed? If so, how would we structure it? All right, let's put that into a term sheet or a proposal or whatever. And let's go ahead and collect a good faith deposit. That's you basically as a borrower saying, all right, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to put my eggs in that basket, and I'm going to trust you to get this the rest of the way. That's just your first week, essentially, is getting that pre-approval. There is one thing I'll add to that, which is there's two mentalities from SBA lending community on these term sheets. One is, all right, it cash flows. Here's your pre-approval, if that. And the other is someone who is my approach really is wrapping your arms around the transaction at a pretty good level, and going a little bit deeper and getting the buy-in from the people who are actually going to give you the approval internally, whether it's your credit officer or a committee, and then putting out a term sheet where, if you're like me, you're following through at a rate of 100%, knock on wood, because that's, it's hard to keep that up, but over the last 3-4 years, that's where I'm at. So two different worlds, okay? Because just in the last month, I've picked up 2 deals that went 6-8 weeks at other banks, got to the last minute, they decline, and now we've got to come and pick up the pieces. And I got to call someone after this, in fact, who's been working with a bank for 2 months, and they're getting the terms switched up on them, and now the seller is wanting to pull the plug, and it's a whole thing, and it happens far too frequently, and it's simply sometimes it's bad luck, but sometimes it's picking the wrong lender. So that's step 1. Step 2 is underwriting. This is where the underwriter comes in and goes deeper than that salesperson like myself you talk to at the front of the process. And they're doing the work to create the SBA credit memo, which could be anywhere from 20, 30, 40 plus pages, outlines the whole scenario. That's what gets put in front of that final decision maker. Underwriting, I would expect to take place within about 2 weeks. And once it's approved, you get a commitment letter. That's when you know the financing is in place. So around this time to get your commitment letter, you should be about a month into the process. You should be finalizing the due diligence side of things around this time. And we should be going into the back half of the transaction, which is closing. Closing is the final leg of the SBA process. You're going to start the purchase agreement negotiations during this time. You're also going to get hit with a big SBA closing checklist that includes a bunch of random stuff like entity docs, insurances, your non-compete, the seller note, the equipment list. It's a bunch of different things that you've got to go track down. And that's really what drives the closing timeline. So all of these different things, lease, landlord consent waiver, which is another document, all these things have to get buttoned up in the closing process. Closing is where everything just gets nailed down, buttoned up. Every T has to be crossed, every I has to be dotted. And once all of that comes together, you're about a few days away from closing. And to me, I'm typically seeing, we're targeting 30 days from that point of commitment letter to get to the closing table. But I've seen 45 days. I've seen 6 months sometimes because of the landlord, right? It's just, it varies, but certainly I would expect a 30 to 45-day process. And that would bring the whole thing to around 60 to 75 days. And there is a lot of legwork. My overarching advice is, you as the borrower, drive that deal. Don't assume other people are doing it. Pick the right deal team. And I've seen, deals go very smoothly if you do all those things correctly. And that would be That would be the biggest. And by the way, the interest rate is a big factor when determining a loan, because when you're looking at the term sheet, you're looking at, oh, who's got the lowest rate, right? Well, everything I just said is equally, if not more important than the interest rate, but it's not going to show up on a proposal or a term sheet. You've got to ask the questions and vet your lender so that you can make the right decision.
So I know you said that there was life insurance requirements. If they have more than one party, you have to have like key man insurance or any other, or if it's like a very contract-based business, is there other insurance requirements that the SBA will look at? Like, I don't know, errors and omissions, if it's a very contract-related business, do you guys require other insurances in place or?
Yeah, absolutely. And DRAM for liquor businesses,
Right.
disability for businesses where, like a doctor who, you break your arm and you can't operate, you have disability insurance. We get business interruption insurance, which basically just gives you a set amount of payment every month for 6 months if your business is completely interrupted, like a storm or a pandemic or something. And that amount usually
Mm-hmm.
covers the SBA loan payment. So it's a mix because you have all of the businesses that are required just to operate. And then we might go a step further in certain cases in certain industries with things like errors and omission, DRAM for liquor, disability. That's about it. And then life insurance is kind of a separate issue because that's not for the business. That's more for you personally. And that is something we typically require. It's deal by like just a rule of thumb to give you an idea is we require it for however much unsecured exposure we have. So like loan amount minus whatever collateral we have, life insurance gets put there in the difference. And on most of these deals, if you're looking at large deals, I mean, they're by and large very much under and unsecured. And so you have sometimes life insurance policies like the one I mentioned earlier where we financed that solar company. I mean, his life insurance policy was 4.8 million. That's a big policy. Luckily he was young, but it sometimes takes some time to get that into place. So it's one of those things we always recommend starting early.
That would be a roadblock for me. I'm 52 and got weight issues, so like a lot of I'd have to go through a bunch of life insurance vendors. We have life insurance, but it's through an employment, and they can't tell us no, right? So I think it would be difficult for most of these life insurance because I've tried to put it in place with key man policies before, and they would come out and say, "Oh, it's your height and your weight. We're not going to do that. You got to do this. You got to lose this amount of weight." And I'm sure there's other but I'm saying it would take time because we'd have to cycle through a few. Have you ever had deals that just don't close because somebody's not insurable?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've seen it kill a deal because at the end of the day, I mean,
Hmm.
when you're talking through the why behind this, obviously it's a tough issue to talk about because it's what happens if you die, right? So if there's collateral, you liquidate the collateral, assuming your family doesn't want to take it over and continue making the payments, and then you're paid. But in most of these acquisitions, you don't have that collateral, so if you get hit by a bus, the life insurance is there to pay down or pay off the SBA loan, and that solves the problem. But if you can't get life insurance, then the next question we as a lender will usually ask is what's your succession planning look like for the business? And so if there are, hey, my son's in the business or my brother, is here and he owns a similar company and it all kind of makes sense and it's easy to kind of plan for that and understand that, then you could make a decision where we document our file and say, hey, he cannot get life insurance or it's just astronomically high. He's went to 3 different companies. Here's the denial letters and here's the succession plan. We're okay with that. But there are some businesses where the succession plan is not there and you can't get life insurance. And at that point, you're just gambling. So those typically don't work.
I was curious on that. What are some of the other things that most people don't think of before they go into this? Is there any other gotchas or anything else that somebody like you said that you guys go up to the full SBA, which is the 5 million, and you said there's a couple companies out there. There are companies that go above that. I'm really wishing, and I'm trying to get somebody from the high up from the SBA to come on the show. I'm really wishing they would open up the program a little bit more. There's still a gap between what SBA will do and what PE will do. So there's an unserved market inside of there from that $5 million acquisition price, probably all the way up to 10 or 15. And I think the SBA could reduce their risk as far as insurance on insuring those loans, because right now they do, like, what is it, 75% what's the insured amount?
Yes, it's 75%.
So, let's look at it and say that you maybe if they went to 7 million, they drop it to 70. If they went to, if they filled up the gap and they did you would have lenders that would step up there so long as 50, 60% of their loan was covered, right? Not all this. Your bank might not do it, but I think the banks would step up if there was, a significantly reduced risk. But there's still a gap in there
100%.
that
And I think they will raise it, and I think they're gonna raise it to 7.5 million. That's my guess. They raised it from 2 million to 5 million. What was that? Maybe 10, 12 years ago, something like that. 2012, I think. Yeah, you got to account for inflation, and there's definitely a gap. And by the way, all of the loans, like there's so many big loans now for us, and it's because you have all these $5 million loans, which it's because we can only get there. So you're seeing the deals I'm seeing are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 million enterprise value companies, and they're coming to me because there's no other game in town, like you said. Couple problems though. The handful of lenders doing the conventional on top of the SBA, now they have a little bit more stringent guidelines to do that, but their exposure, to your point, is ultimately if you're doing a $7 million deal with a $3.75 million guarantee, you're basically having a 55% guarantee. So right away, if you gave them a 55, 60, 65% guarantee on a larger loan, they would do it. But there's still a lot of lenders that even with a 75% guarantee there's no way, at least at first, where they're going to do a $7.5 million loan because their exposure on that loan is still really high relative to the size of the bank. And they just cannot, I mean, most lenders won't even do a $5 million unsecured loan right now. So of course it's going to be lender by lender, but absolute game changer. If they open that up, we would do them. We would definitely do them. And I think that it will happen. It's just is taking a little bit more time because so much of the emphasis on at the SBA is on the small guy and doing the small loans. Focusing on the upper end, in my opinion, creates a little bit of the appearance of, hey, we're helping these big businesses, which, you and I understand, first of all, that's not the case. And also we're creating jobs. It's all about job creation at the end of the day. So I think people at the SBA are very receptive to that, but I can't remember, or I don't fully know if it's going to take congressional approval to do that increase. And that, of course, it would be a different story.
Yeah, it's a nightmare to get anything like that done. The I caught something you said in there. It sounds like there's some compression to where some businesses come to you and they get sold for undervalued just to slide underneath the SBA radar, because they know that's the only way they're going to get sold. Is that what you're saying? It's like some of these deals are true on paper worth way more than the
Bigger seller notes.
yeah.
So they're doing more seller financing, which is a good thing. But I mean, I'm doing one deal right now. It's actually not an acquisition, it's a refinance, but they have a 6 point something
Mm,
million dollar loan and they are trying to refinance debt. It was actually one of these Main Street loans from
mm,
the COVID era, but those were done on
mhm.
5-year balloons. And can you believe it's been almost 5 years? So next year their note matures, so they're trying to be a little bit proactive, and so I'm good for 5. I told them they're having to get mezzanine debt on top of that, and that's hard to find, but they know someone who's doing it, I guess, and that shouldn't be the case. I mean, this company's been around for decades, and they don't have conventional financing options, and the SBA is their last hope, and they're short $1.5 million. And you're having to search the country for someone who's willing to lend in second position, like without a tremendous amount of collateral to support. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. And guess what? If they don't do it and if their note matures and the bank forecloses on the business and they shut it down and lose all their jobs, and it's a $20 million business, by the way, revenue wise. So they got a lot of jobs there. So you take those types of cases to the SBA and say, this is why we need this increased amount. they're going to be very receptive to that.
Right. And business get in trouble when things like that happen, because when it comes down the wire, they'll find the money, and they'll find it from invoice factoring and some of these other things that are usury, right? You see some of these, like, loan you overnight for invoice factoring and some of this other stuff that can happen. They're 18, 20, 25%, and they have maturity dates that are like fairly short. They're short lived, so you have to kind of roll them into each other. And
Right.
I've seen a couple guys that were able to buy businesses they call turnaround, just because they got so tangled up in, what we would, in the civilian world would be to payday loans, right? That, there's these factoring of invoices. They got so tied up into them that they were going to lose the business anyway. So they sold it for what the loan amounts were. And, somebody could come in with cash and straighten the whole thing up. And it all came from some balloon payment or something else that, triggered them into a panic mode. I just looked up at the clock, and we've already been over an hour, man, just hanging out with you and chatting. Let's cover some cool stuff here, like, how do people get a hold of you? And how do they find your you have a great podcast, how do they find that? Let's run and then we'll do one little short take at the end. So first of all, how do people get a hold of you?
Yes. I would send people to my YouTube channel, SBA Ray. That's where we put a lot of educational content. The podcast is the Art of SBA Lending. That's another channel I have. That's actually, I started that one in 2019 to help SBA lenders hone their craft. So if you're interested in the more inside baseball stuff, that's where we go for that. And then, of course, you can email me. It's ray.drew@trueliantfcu.org.
Awesome, awesome. And if somebody can only remember 2 or 3 things a day, what would you want them to have as their takeaways? What would you want them to walk away from, with this show?
Well, I would say what comes to mind is that the 7A program, which is like the SBA's flagship program, it's about a 25 to $28 billion program a year. It helps about 60,000 business owners every year, and it's truly, I mean, thankfully not the biggest secret anymore, but for years it was a tremendous secret. But the idea that you can leverage this program for up to $5 million to start, grow, or expand your business with terms you cannot find anywhere else in the market, good terms, it's just like it. I've seen it change so many people's lives. At one point, one year, half of my loans were for first generation immigrant families for their businesses. And it's like one of the best, if not the only program working very well out of Washington, D.C. So it's kind of coming through my veins at this point. I love it so much. But the flip side to that, once you see it and you're like, oh, I could buy $1 million EBITDA business, all I got to do is PG, put a lien on my house, and quit my job. Well, there's risk to that. The default rates are still historically low. They're under 3%, but they're creeping up because they were under 2%. So the increase is actually very steep, but it's still relatively small. But there's a lot that goes within that huge portfolio. So we don't have time to break all that down, but just know you're all in with these. You are all in. If it doesn't work out, bad things happen. Now you can always rebuild. Life goes on. You have your family, you have your health, and that's great. But I like to say both messages. This program is amazing. There is risk. I, of course, as a lender, I'm always thinking of it through, is this a good deal for you? And having someone like me as a resource there in your corner who's has your best interest in mind, someone like me, picking a lender that's like has that experience is absolutely key. And I, of course, am always open to helping anyone. I'm always trying to provide resources. So please don't hesitate to reach out if I could be of any assistance.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll call that a show.
Perfect. Thank you. Great show.
I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between $5 million and $30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with. It has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace, how to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.